An undercover CEO goes to order at his own restaurant, stops cold when he hears two boys behind him. Michael Luciano loved his restaurant, Luciano's Bistro. It was the crown jewel of his career, a place where flavors told stories and every meal felt like an event. But lately, something about it didn't feel right. The reviews online were glowing, the sales were steady, and the staff seemed content. Yet Michael couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was out of touch with the heart of his business. So he decided to do what he always did when he felt disconnected: go undercover. Not as a waiter or a cook this time, but as a regular customer. Wearing a simple hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, he walked through the doors of his own restaurant one rainy Tuesday evening. The staff barely glanced at him, just another customer in the dinner rush. He slid into a booth near the back, his eyes scanning the room. The restaurant was bustling. Servers darted between tables with plates of steaming pasta and trays of drinks. Couples leaned in close over candlelighted tables, while families laughed and shared bites of dessert. Michael smiled. Luciano's Bistro was alive and thriving. A cheerful waitress approached his table, her smile practiced but warm. "Good evening, can I start you off with something to drink?" "Water's fine," Michael said, keeping his voice casual. He didn't want to risk being recognized just yet. "And give me a few minutes to look over the menu." The waitress nodded and left, and Michael opened the menu he knew by heart. But his focus wasn't on the dishes, it was on the chatter around him. This was his chance to hear unfiltered opinions, to see his restaurant through the eyes of the people who mattered most, his customers. Just as he started to relax, he heard voices from the booth directly behind him. Two boys, their hushed tones catching his attention. "Do you think we'll even see him?" one boy whispered, his voice high and anxious, like he wasn't used to being sneaky. "I don't know," the second boy replied, his tone sharper. "But Mom said this is the place. She said he comes here all the time." Michael's ears perked up. Who were they talking about? He kept his head down, pretending to study the menu, but his attention was fully on the boys. "What if we get caught?" the first boy asked nervously. "We're not even supposed to be here." "We won't get caught," the second boy snapped. "We just need to figure out who he is." Michael frowned. Who could they be looking for? His first instinct was to dismiss it as kids being curious, maybe looking for a local celebrity, but their voices carried an urgency that didn't sit right with him. "Mom said it's his fault everything went wrong," the second boy continued. "She said if it weren't for him, we wouldn't be living like this." Michael stiffened, his heart pounding. His fault? He forced himself to stay still, but his hands gripped the menu tightly. The words were too close, too pointed. Who were they talking about? The waitress returned with his water, breaking his focus. "Ready to order?" she asked brightly. Michael hesitated, glancing over the menu. He wasn't really reading. I'll just have the house special." "Great choice," she said, jotting it down before disappearing again. As soon as she left, Michael leaned slightly to the side, trying to catch more of the boys' conversation without drawing attention to himself. "Mom said he ruined her life," the second boy muttered, "that he took everything from her. Do you think he'll even care?" "I don't know," the first boy whispered, "like if we tell him?" "I don't know," the second boy replied, his voice hard, "but I want to see him. I want to see the guy who made us lose everything." Michael's stomach churned. The boys' words hit him like a blow. They weren't talking about some random person. They were talking about someone they blamed for their mother's suffering. And the way they spoke with such raw bitterness sent a chill down his spine. Were they talking about him? It didn't make sense. Michael prided himself on running his business with integrity. Sure, he'd had to make tough decisions over the years, firing employees who underperformed, negotiating hard with suppliers, but nothing that would warrant this kind of accusation. Would it? Like he wasn't used to being sneaky. "I don't know," the second boy replied, his tone sharper, "but Mom said this is the place. She said he comes here all the time." Michael's ears perked up. Who were they talking about? He kept his head down, pretending to study the menu, but his attention was fully on the boys. "What if we get caught?" the first boy asked nervously. "We're not even supposed to be here." "We won't get caught," the second boy snapped. "We just need to figure out who he is." Michael frowned. Who could they be looking for? His first instinct was to dismiss it as kids being curious, maybe looking for a local celebrity, but their voices carried an urgency that didn't sit right with him. Mom said it's his fault everything went wrong, the second boy continued. She said if it weren't for him, we wouldn't be living like this. Michael stiffened, his heart pounding. His fault? He forced himself to stay still, but his hands gripped the menu tightly. The words were too close, too pointed. Who were they talking about? The waitress returned with his water, breaking his focus. "Ready to order?" she asked brightly. Michael hesitated, glancing over the menu. He wasn't really reading. I'll just have the house special." "Great choice," she said, jotting it down before disappearing again. As soon as she left, Michael leaned slightly to the side, trying to catch more of the boys' conversation without drawing attention to himself. "Mom said he ruined her life," the second boy muttered, "that he took everything from her. Do you think he'll even care?" "I don't know," the first boy whispered, "like if we tell him?" "I don't know," the second boy replied, his voice hard, "but I want to see him. I want to see the guy who made us lose everything." Michael's stomach churned. The boy's words hit him like a blow. They weren't talking about some random person. They were talking about someone they blamed for their mother's suffering. And the way they spoke with such raw bitterness sent a chill down his spine. Were they talking about him? It didn't make sense. Michael prided himself on running his business with integrity. Sure, he'd had to make tough decisions over the years, firing employees who underperformed, negotiating hard with suppliers, but nothing that would warrant this kind of accusation. Would it? The boys' voices dropped lower, making it harder to hear. Frustrated, Michael decided he couldn't just sit there anymore. He had to know what they were talking about. But how? Confronting them directly seemed risky. If they really were talking about him, revealing his identity could escalate the situation. But if he stayed quiet, he might never get answers. He took a deep breath and glanced toward the booth behind him. The boys were young, no older than 13 or 14. One had a mop of curly hair peeking out from under a hoodie, while the other wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. They looked nervous, glancing around as if they expected someone to throw them out at any moment. Michael's mind raced. Should he call over the waitress and ask her about them? Should he follow them when they left? Or should he simply turn around and ask them outright who they were looking for? Before he could decide, the boy in the hoodie leaned closer to his companion. "We just need to wait a little longer," he said. "If he's here, we'll know." Mom said he wouldn't hide. Michael's breath caught. Wouldn't hide. The words felt like a challenge, a direct accusation. He suddenly felt exposed, as if they could see right through his disguise. What had he done to their mother, and why did they seem so sure that he was the man they were looking for? Michael didn't know the answers yet, but one thing was clear: his quiet undercover visit had turned into something far more complicated, and he couldn't walk away from it now. Michael's pulse quickened. His quiet undercover visit had transformed into something far more personal, and he needed answers. The boys' words gnawed at him, each one sharper than the last. Mom said he ruined her life, took everything from her. Who was their mother? What connection did she have to him? Deciding he couldn't just sit and wonder, Michael subtly adjusted his cap, stood up, and walked toward the counter near the kitchen. From there, he could observe the boys without being obvious. As he waited for his food, he motioned for the waitress who had served him. "Hey," he said, keeping his tone casual. "Those two boys in the back, do they come here often?" The waitress glanced over her shoulder, then shook her head. "No, I don't think I've seen them before." "Why, are they causing trouble?" "No, nothing like that," Michael said quickly. "Just curious." The waitress shrugged and walked away, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. The boys didn't look like troublemakers, but their whispers suggested they were here for something, or someone. And the more he replayed their words in his head, the more certain he became they were talking about him. Returning to his booth, Michael sat down and turned his attention back to the boys. They were still deep in conversation, their voices low but intense. "I just want to know why," the boy in the hoodie said, "why he did it." "Mom never tells us the full story." The boy in the cap hesitated. "What if it's not him? What if we got the wrong guy?" "It's him," the first boy insisted. "Mom showed me his picture." It's definitely him. Michael's breath caught. They've seen my picture. His chest tightened as memories from years ago began bubbling to the surface. Faces, names, moments blurred together in his mind, but nothing stood out. Who could their mother be, and what had she told them about him? Unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Michael decided to take a direct approach. He stood, took a deep breath, and walked toward the boys' booth. As he approached, they both tensed, their wide eyes darting up to meet his. "Hey," Michael said gently, sliding his hands into his pockets to appear non-threatening. "I couldn't help but notice you two seem a little uneasy. Is everything all right?" The boy in the hoodie straightened, his face hardening. "We're fine." Michael nodded, pretending not to notice the edge in the boy's voice. "That's good. I just thought, well, you mentioned someone earlier, someone who might be here. Are you looking for someone?" The boys exchanged a glance. The one in the cap fidgeted nervously, while the boy in the hoodie squared his shoulders. "Why do you care?" he asked, his tone defensive. Michael hesitated. How do I handle this without giving myself away? He decided to tread carefully. "I just thought maybe I could help. If you're looking for someone, I might know them." The boy in the hoodie narrowed his eyes, studying Michael's face. Then, as if something clicked, his expression shifted. "Wait a second," he said slowly. You look familiar." Michael's heart sank. He forced a small laugh. "A lot of people say that. I must have one of those faces." "No," the boy insisted, his voice rising. "You're him. You're Michael Luciano." The second boy gasped, his face pale. "Are you serious? Is it really him?" Michael felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. There's no use denying it now. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I'm Michael Luciano. But how do you know who I am?" The boy in the hoodie glared at him, his green eyes blazing with anger. "Because of what you did to our mom." Michael blinked, taken aback. "Your mom? I'm sorry, but I don't even know who—" "Yes, you do," the boy snapped, cutting him off. "Angela Carter. Remember her?" The name hit Michael like a thunderclap. Angela Carter. His mind raced back to years ago, a talented young woman who had worked for him as a sous chef. She had been full of passion and ideas, eager to make her mark in the culinary world. But then one day, she had quit abruptly, leaving no explanation. He hadn't thought about her in years. "Angela," he said slowly, the name feeling heavy on his tongue. "She worked here, didn't she?" The boy's jaw tightened. "She didn't just work here. She gave everything to this place. She helped you build it. And what did you do? You stole from her. You took her recipes and claimed them as your own. You made sure she couldn't get hired anywhere else. She told us everything." Michael stared at the boys, his mind reeling. "That's not true," he said, his voice trembling. "I never— Why would she think that?" "Because it's the truth," the boy shot back. "You ruined her life. You ruined our lives." The second boy, quieter and more hesitant, finally spoke up. "She said you were jealous of her, that you couldn't handle someone else getting the spotlight." Michael felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. He searched his memory, trying to piece together what had happened all those years ago. Had he made mistakes? Had he been so focused on building his dream that he hadn't noticed someone else's falling apart? "I need to talk to your mom," Michael said finally, his voice firm but calm. "If what she told you is true, I need to hear it from her. Please, will you let me talk to her?" The boys exchanged a wary glance. Finally, the one in the hoodie said, "She's not here right now. But if you really want to know the truth, you'll have to come see us." Michael nodded, his heart heavy. "Then I will." The rain had turned into a steady drizzle by the time Michael arrived at the modest apartment complex the boys had directed him to. The building was old, with peeling paint and cracked sidewalks, a stark contrast to the upscale life he'd grown accustomed to. As he stood under the dim porch light, Michael couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. If what the boys had said was true, if Angela Carter's life had spiraled because of him, then he owed her more than just an apology. He owed her an explanation. The door creaked open, and Jacob, the older boy, stood there, his expression guarded. "You came," he said, his voice laced with a mix of surprise and distrust. Michael nodded. I need to understand what happened. Where's your mom? Jacob hesitated, then stepped aside. She's in the living room. Michael stepped inside, his heart pounding. The apartment was small but tidy, filled with signs of a life lived modestly but with care. Family photos lined the walls, and the smell of something faintly floral lingered in the air. Michael's eyes landed on the woman sitting on the couch, her face partially obscured by the glow of the TV. Angela Carter. Her once vivid auburn hair was streaked with gray, and there was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there all those years ago. But she was still unmistakably Angela, the ambitious, determined woman who had once been a rising star in his kitchen. Angela, Michael said softly. She looked up, her expression flickering between shock and resentment. Michael Luciano, she said, her tone cold. I can't say I expected to see you here. Michael stepped closer, his voice earnest. Angela, I didn't know it was you. The boys told me what you said about what happened. I need to know, did I really hurt you that badly? Angela's eyes narrowed, and she set the remote control aside. You don't remember, do you? She asked bitterly. Of course you don't. People like you never do. Angela, I'm not here to argue, Michael said, his voice breaking slightly. I honestly don't remember doing anything that could have destroyed your life. Please, tell me what happened. Angela leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest. You want the short version? Fine. You took credit for my work. All those dishes that made your restaurant famous? Most of them were mine. I trusted you, Michael. I thought you were mentoring me, helping me grow, but you were just using me. Michael's brow furrowed. Angela, that's not how I remember it. You were part of the team, an important part, but I never claimed your work as my own. No. Angela shot back, her voice rising. Then why did every article about Luciano's Bistro mention your name, and only your name? Why did you ignore my contributions? And when I finally confronted you, what did you do? You blacklisted me. No one would hire me after I left. Michael's stomach churned. Blacklisted? Angela, I didn't. I would never. Yes, you did, she said, her voice trembling with anger. I tried to get jobs at every major restaurant in the city, and every time I was turned away. It was like someone had put a mark on my name. I had to leave the industry entirely, and now I'm here, barely getting by, working a job that doesn't even come close to what I was capable of, all because of you. Michael's heart sank. He hadn't been aware of any blacklisting, but that didn't mean it hadn't happened. He thought back to his early days running the restaurant, days filled with pressure, mistakes, and yes, moments of selfish ambition. Could he have unintentionally crushed Angela's career in his quest to succeed? I didn't know, Michael said quietly. Angela, I swear to you, if I had known, if I had realized how my actions were affecting you, I would have done something. Angela laughed bitterly. It's too late for that, Michael. The damage is done. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between them. Michael glanced at the boys, who were watching from the hallway, their expressions a mix of anger and confusion. He turned back to Angela, his resolve hardening. It's not too late, he said firmly. I can't undo the past, but I can try to make things right now. Angela, you're an incredible chef. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a position at Luciano's Bistro, a senior position with the credit and recognition you deserve. Angela's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked vulnerable, caught off guard by the offer. But then her expression hardened again. You think you can just buy my forgiveness with a job? She asked, her voice shaking. No, Michael said, shaking his head. This isn't about buying forgiveness. It's about giving you the opportunity you should have had from the start. I can't erase what I did, Angela, but I want to help you get back to doing what you love. You don't have to forgive me, but please at least think about it. Angela stared at him, her emotions warring on her face. Finally, she exhaled deeply, her shoulders slumping. I don't know, Michael. I don't know if I can trust you. You don't have to decide right now, Michael said. Take your time. But whatever you decide, I want you to know, I'm sorry. Truly. For the first time, Angela's expression softened, if only slightly. I'll think about it, she said quietly. Michael nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope. As he turned to leave, Jacob's voice stopped him. Hey, the boy said, his tone less hostile than before. Do you really mean it about helping her? Michael turned back, meeting Jacob's gaze. I do, he said sincerely. Your mom deserves that much and more. Jacob studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. Okay, we'll see. As Michael stepped out into the rain, he felt the strange mix of emotions, guilt, relief, and a renewed sense of purpose. The road to redemption wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to walk it. The following days were a blur of emotions for Michael. The encounter with Angela and her boys had shaken him deeply. It wasn't just guilt, it was a sense of responsibility. He had built his success on the foundation of others' hard work, and while he had never intentionally sought to hurt anyone, his blind ambition had clearly left casualties in its wake. Now he was determined to fix it. Michael sat in his office at Luciano's bistro, staring at the notes he had scribbled after his meeting with Angela. He couldn't change the past, but he could take steps to acknowledge it and create a better future for her sons, and for himself. His first call was to an old industry contact. David, he began, leaning back in his chair, I need your help. Do you remember Angela Carter? Angela. David's voice was surprised. Yeah, of course. She was one of the most promising chefs I've ever seen. What happened to her? Michael hesitated. I made mistakes, and she paid the price. I need to make it right. David listened quietly as Michael explained the situation. Well, David said finally, if you're serious about this, I think the first step is getting her story out there. The industry needs to know what she's capable of. Michael nodded. That's exactly what I was thinking. Thanks, David. Hanging up the phone, Michael set a plan in motion. He reached out to food critics, local media, and industry leaders, sharing Angela's contributions to Luciano's bistro and highlighting her skills. At the same time, he worked on creating a new position for her at the restaurant, a co-head chef role with full creative control. A week later, Angela stepped into Luciano's bistro for the first time in years. She was greeted not with fanfare, but with quiet respect. The staff, many of whom had never met her, had heard her story from Michael. They looked at her with admiration, sensing the significance of her return. Michael met her at the door, his expression earnest. Thank you for coming, he said. Angela nodded stiffly. I almost didn't. But Jacob and Ethan, they convinced me to hear you out. Michael smiled. Your boys are smart. You raised them well. Angela's expression softened slightly. They're good kids, and they want me to be happy, even if I'm not sure I can trust you yet. I understand, Michael said, and I don't expect your trust right away. But I hope you'll give me the chance to prove that I'm serious about this. Angela followed him into the kitchen. We laid out his proposal. The co-head chef role, full creative freedom, and a public acknowledgement of her contributions to Luciano's bistro. He even showed her a draft of a press release he planned to send to local media. Angela read it carefully, her face unreadable. When she finally looked up, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I never thought I'd hear you say any of this, she admitted. It's a lot to take in. I know, Michael said. Take all the time you need to decide. But no matter what, I want you to know how much I regret the way things turned out. Angela was silent for a long moment. Then she surprised him by extending her hand. Let's see if we can make this work. Michael shook her hand, a wave of relief washing over him. I won't let you down. Angela's return to Luciano's bistro wasn't without its challenges. Rebuilding trust took time, and old wounds didn't heal overnight. But as the weeks passed, the tension between her and Michael began to ease. Together, they created new dishes, blending her bold ideas with his refined techniques. The restaurant thrived, garnering praise for its innovative menu and the collaboration between its two head chefs. One evening, as the restaurant buzzed with activity, Michael stepped into the kitchen to find Angela standing by the stove, a small smile playing on her lips. What's so funny? He asked. Angela glanced at him, her smile growing. I was just thinking about how far we've come. If you told me a month ago that I'd be back here working with you, I wouldn't have believed it. Michael chuckled. Honestly, neither would I. But I'm glad you're here. The place feels complete now. Angela nodded, her expression thoughtful. It's not perfect, but it's a start. As the weeks turned into months, Michael began to see the restaurant in a new light. It wasn't just a business. It was a community, a place where people came together to create something greater than themselves. And Angela's return had reminded him of the importance of recognizing and valuing the contributions of everyone who helped build that community. Jacob and Ethan became regular visitors at the restaurant, their initial distrust slowly giving way to curiosity and pride. They watched their mother thrive in her element, her confidence returning with every dish she created. One evening, as the boys sat at a table near the kitchen, Michael approached them with a smile. He said, "Your mom is one of the best chefs I've ever worked with. You should be proud of her." Jacob looked at him, his expression serious. "We are," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "And I guess we were wrong about you, a little." Michael laughed, ruffling Jacob's hair. "I'll take it." For the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of peace. He knew he couldn't erase the mistakes of past, but he also knew that redemption wasn't about perfection. It was about trying, learning, and growing. And as he watched Angela and her sons laughing together in the restaurant that had once been the source of so much pain, Michael realized that the journey was just beginning.